Brother Marcus died trying to warn us about what he saw in that confessional booth. His final words, scrawled in blood on the monastery floor, were just 2 sentences. It wore Father Thomas like a suit. God forgive me, I looked into its eyes. The year was 1307, October 13th, to be exact. The day every Templar knight in France learned what betrayal tasted like. King Philip IV had orchestrated the largest coordinated arrest in medieval history, rounding up hundreds of warrior monks on charges of heresy, devil worship, and crimes so obscene the official documents still make historians uncomfortable. But here's the thing most people don't know about that infamous Friday the 13th. Not every Templar was arrested. 12 knights escaped from the Paris temple before dawn, and they took something with them. Something that wasn't supposed to leave consecrated ground. Brother Marcus wasn't one of the famous Templars. His name doesn't appear in any of the grand histories or the romantic legends about hidden treasures. He was a record keeper, a man who spent his days copying manuscripts and cataloging the order's vast collection of relics brought back from the Holy Land. But Marcus had a secret that would have gotten him burned even without King Philip's vendetta. He kept a personal journal, written in a cipher that mixed Latin, Greek, and what linguists now believe might be fragments of Aramaic. That journal survived, hidden in the walls of a Scottish monastery for 7 centuries, discovered during renovations in 2003. What it contained changed everything we thought we knew about the fall of the Templars. The entries that matter begin 3 weeks before the mass arrest. Marcus writes about a new arrival at the Paris temple, a wooden chest delivered under armed escort from the Templar fortress at Acre, one of the last Christian strongholds to fall in the Holy Land. The chest came with explicit instructions from the Grand Master himself. It was to be opened only in the presence of 3 senior knights, and its contents were to be examined, and then immediately resealed. Marcus wasn't supposed to be there. He was transcribing an inventory in an adjacent chamber when he heard the commotion. He described the sound as wrong. Not loud, but wrong in the same way that hearing a voice call your name from an empty room is wrong. The kind of sound that makes your spine straighten and your hands go cold. He put down his quill and moved to the doorway, staying in shadow, watching. 3 senior knights stood around a table. The chest was open, and one of them, a veteran named Sir Guillaume, was backing away with his hand pressed over his mouth. "What is it?" Marcus heard one of the others ask. Sir Guillaume didn't answer immediately. He just kept staring into that chest, his face gone the color of old parchment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "It's still moving." Marcus wrote that he should have left then, should have returned to his desk and forgotten what he'd seen. But curiosity has always been humanity's original sin, hasn't it? He crept closer, positioning himself where he could see into the chest. He never wrote exactly what was inside. Instead, he described the aftermath, how Sir Guillaume began to shake, how the other 2 knights slammed the chest shut so hard the sound echoed through the stone corridors, how all 3 of them stood in silence for what felt like an eternity before one of them said, "The Grand Master must never know we looked." That's when Marcus noticed Father Thomas standing in another doorway across the chamber. The monastery's confessor, a thin man with gentle eyes and hands that trembled from years of copying scripture. Father Thomas was looking at the chest with an expression Marcus described as hungry. Not curious, hungry. Over the next 2 weeks, strange things began happening in the Paris temple. Small things at first. Brothers reported nightmares, so vivid, they woke up screaming about drowning in sand while something ancient watched from beneath the dunes. The monastery's dogs refused to enter certain corridors. And Father Thomas began spending hours alone in the chapel after midnight, kneeling before the altar in silence, so complete it felt oppressive to anyone who passed by. Marcus noticed that Father Thomas had changed, not in any single obvious way, but in 1,000 tiny details that added up to wrongness. The way he moved was different, smoother somehow, as if he was concentrating on making his body perform actions that should have been automatic. His smile came a half-second too late when someone spoke to him. And his eyes, Marcus wrote, his eyes didn't blink as often as they should. Then Sir Guillaume disappeared. He was there at morning prayers, and by afternoon he was gone. The official explanation was that he'd been sent on urgent business to one of the order's holdings in Normandy. But Marcus knew that was a lie, because he'd seen Guillaume's travel documents still sitting on his desk. The knight's personal effects remained untouched in his cell. His sword still hung on the wall. Men don't leave for urgent journeys without their swords. Marcus went to Father Thomas, seeking guidance, seeking confession for the gnawing fear that was consuming him. He described walking to the confessional booth in the chapel's side chamber, the one with the carved screen that had heard 10,000 sins whispered into its shadow. He knelt, made the sign of the cross, and began to speak. "Forgive me, Father, for I have kept silent when I should have spoken." The voice that answered him wasn't Father Thomas's voice. Oh, it had the same pitch, the same rhythm, but it was wrong in the same way that voice calling your name from an empty room is wrong. "Tell me everything you've kept silent about, my son." So Marcus did. He talked about the chest, about what he'd glimpsed in Sir Guillaume's face before it was shut, about the changes in Father Thomas. He talked and talked, his words spilling out in the darkness of that confessional, and the thing on the other side of the screen listened with perfect patience. When Marcus finally fell silent, exhausted and trembling, he heard a sound he would remember until his dying day. It was laughter. Not malicious laughter, but the delighted laughter of someone who's just received an unexpected gift. "Thank you, Brother Marcus," the voice said, and now it wasn't even trying to sound like Father Thomas anymore. "You've been very helpful. You see, I've been learning how to be human again. It's been so very long. The gestures, the expressions, the timing of breath and blink. It's more complicated than you'd think. But I'm getting better. Would you like to see?" Marcus wrote that he stood up so fast he knocked over the kneeling bench. He stumbled backward out of the confessional, his heart hammering against his ribs. The door to the priest's side of the booth was opening. Something was standing up, unfolding itself from the cramped space. And then Father Thomas stepped out into the candlelight, smiling that too-late smile. "Don't run," it said in Father Thomas's voice. "I won't hurt you. I don't need to. You've already told me everything I needed to know." Marcus ran anyway. He ran through the corridors of the Paris temple, past startled brothers, past the kitchens and the dormitories and the great hall where Templar knights once feasted after returning from crusade. He ran until he reached the Grand Master's chambers and pounded on the door hard enough to split his knuckles. When Jacques de Molay himself answered, Marcus poured out his story in a breathless torrent of words that probably sounded like the ravings of a madman. But the Grand Master didn't dismiss him. Instead, de Molay's face went pale and grave, and he said something that Marcus recorded word for word. "So it's begun. God help us all, it's begun." The Grand Master knew. He'd known all along what was in that chest, what had been brought back from Acre. The Templars hadn't just been soldiers and bankers. In the Holy Land, they'd been archaeologists digging beneath ancient temples, searching for relics and secrets that predated Christ by thousands of years. And in the ruins of a city older than Jerusalem, older than Babylon, they'd found something. Something that the Sumerians had buried and tried to forget. Something that wore human skin the way we wear clothing. The Grand Master told Marcus to gather the 11 most trusted knights and meet him in the deepest vault beneath the temple. Tonight, before dawn, he said they were leaving Paris and taking the chest with them, far from here, to a place where it could be hidden properly, permanently. And he said one more thing that made Marcus's blood run cold. "If you see Father Thomas again before we leave, don't speak to him. Don't look at him. Don't acknowledge his existence. It learns from interaction." Marcus never made it to that midnight meeting. As he returned to his cell to gather his few possessions, he found Father Thomas waiting for him, sitting on his bed in the darkness. The moonlight coming through the narrow window painted half his face in silver, and Marcus wrote that in that light he could see it clearly. Something else looking out through Father Thomas's eyes, something studying him with the fascinated attention of a scholar examining a particularly interesting insect. "You told him," it said, "not angry, almost proud. I knew you would. That's what humans do. You warn each other. You huddle together against the dark. You make plans and prayers. It's beautiful, really. I'd forgotten how beautiful your hope is. Marcus asked it what it wanted. What it was. The thing, wearing Father Thomas, tilted its head at an angle that was just slightly too far to be human. I'm old, it said simply. Older than your church, older than your Christ, older than the desert that buried my city. We were many once. We walked among your ancestors when they were still learning to make fire. We taught them things. Words. Rituals. How to call us back when we'd been away too long. But your kind grew frightened. You always do. So you buried us in boxes and tombs and sealed us away with prayers and symbols you didn't understand, copying protection from protection until the meaning was lost. It stood up, and Marcus saw that it moved Father Thomas's body with perfect confidence now. No more hesitation, no more delayed gestures. It had learned. The knights who dug us up thought we were holy relics, sacred remains. They have no idea what they've brought into their fortress. And now, it smiled with Father Thomas's mouth. Now I'm not alone anymore. That's when Marcus understood. The chest hadn't contained just one thing. It had contained seeds, instructions, a contagion of ancient intelligence that spread through proximity, through eye contact, through the intimate connection of confession when a terrified soul pours itself out to a listener in the darkness. Sir Guillaume hadn't been sent to Normandy. Sir Guillaume was gone, replaced by something wearing his face, something that was probably standing guard over the Grand Master's chambers, right now, waiting. Marcus did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed the knife he used to sharpen quills, and he drove it into Father Thomas's chest, right where a human heart should be. The thing looked down at the blade protruding from its stolen body with something like curiosity. Then it looked back up at Marcus. That's going to make this body stop working, it said. But I've already learned how to move to a new one. The Grand Master opened himself to me when he spoke your name. Did you know that? Names have power, Marcus. They create connection. And connection is all I need. Father Thomas's body collapsed. Marcus ran again, this time toward the vault, screaming warnings as he went. He found 2 of the 11 knights the Grand Master had summoned. They believed him. They helped him bar the doors and sound the alarm bell that usually signaled attack. But it was too late. Throughout the Paris temple, brothers and knights were discovering that their trusted companions had become something else. Worse, they were realizing that they couldn't tell who was still human and who had been replaced because the things wearing human faces had learned to mimic humanity perfectly. The massacre that followed wasn't recorded in any official history. It happened in the hours before King Philip's soldiers arrived, in the chaos and darkness of a sanctuary turning against itself. Marcus and a handful of survivors managed to break into the vault where the Grand Master waited with the chest. But the old man wasn't alone. 10 of the 11 knights he'd summoned were there with him. 10 pairs of eyes, all turned to look at the newcomers with perfect synchronization. You're too late, the Grand Master said in a voice that wasn't quite his own anymore. We're leaving just as planned. We're taking the chest somewhere safe. Somewhere we can finally open ourselves to the beauty we've been denying. Marcus wrote that he set the vault on fire. There was lamp oil stored there and ancient manuscripts that burned like kindling, and he poured it all over everything while the things wearing his brothers' faces watched with expressions of mild curiosity. The last thing he saw before the smoke drove him out was the chest, sitting on its table, lid slightly ajar, and something inside it that might have been moving, might have been breathing, might have been singing in a language that predated human speech. He escaped the burning temple and fled into the Paris streets hours before King Philip's soldiers arrived to arrest Templars who were, in many cases, already dead or gone. Marcus made it as far as a monastery in Scotland, carrying nothing but his ciphered journal and a wound in his side that was slowly killing him. The monks there tried to save him, but infection had set in, and medieval medicine could only do so much. His final entry was written in letters that grew increasingly shaky as blood loss and fever took him. He described how 7 of the escaped Templars had indeed survived and scattered across Europe, taking pieces of the chest with them, hiding them in places that would become the sites of new Templar churches and monasteries. He listed locations, but the centuries have made his geographical descriptions nearly impossible to verify. The Scottish Highlands, a cave system beneath Barcelona, a sealed chamber in a Portuguese fortress, an island off the coast of Brittany, places where the architecture grew strange, where the stonemasons carved symbols that didn't appear in any Christian tradition, where monks reported dreams of cities beneath sand and voices calling from wells that had no bottom. And he wrote about the fear that haunted his dying hours. What if the fire hadn't killed them? What if things that can wear human bodies, like clothing, can simply step out of burning flesh and find new skins to inhabit? What if some of those Templars who survived King Philip's purge were already gone, replaced by ancient intelligences that had 700 years to learn how to pass as human perfectly? Marcus's last words were a warning written in blood when he no longer had the strength to hold a quill. It wore Father Thomas like a suit. God forgive me, I looked into its eyes. The journal was discovered sealed behind a stone in 2003. Academic examination confirmed the manuscript dated to the early 14th century, and the cipher, once broken, revealed Marcus's account. Officially, historians classify it as a fever dream, a traumatized man processing the destruction of his order through the lens of medieval superstition. But there are a few details that give even the skeptics pause. In 2007, exactly 700 years after the Templar arrests, archaeological teams excavating beneath 3 separate medieval monasteries in Scotland, Portugal, and Spain all reported the same discovery. Sealed chambers containing fragments of wooden boxes inscribed with symbols that don't match any known language. The teams described an unusual number of psychological incidents during the excavations. Team members experiencing vivid nightmares. Unexplained personality changes. 2 archaeologists in Scotland who became convinced their colleagues had been replaced and had to be removed from the site for psychiatric evaluation. All 3 excavations were quietly shut down, the sites resealed, and the findings classified under cultural preservation laws that essentially guarantee they'll never be examined again. The official reports mention unstable structural conditions and concerns about artifact degradation. But one of the archaeologists from the Portuguese site, a professor who spoke on condition of anonymity, described something else. She said that on the last day before the site was closed, she found one of her graduate students standing in the sealed chamber, alone in the darkness, holding a fragment of the wooden box and whispering to it. When she called his name, he turned around and smiled at her, and she said it was the most perfect smile she'd ever seen. Too perfect. Practiced. Like someone who'd been rehearsing in a mirror for a very long time. "What are you doing down here?" she asked him. "Learning," he replied. And then, after a pause that was just slightly too long, remembering. She had him removed from the site. He's teaching at a university in California now, married with 2 children, by all accounts a normal, successful academic. She still has nightmares about that smile. The wooden fragments from all 3 sites were transported to a Vatican archive that officially doesn't exist, stored in a climate-controlled vault beneath Rome alongside thousands of other objects that the Church has decided the world isn't ready to see. The carbon dating on the wood came back strange, much older than it should have been, older than the medieval Templars, older than Christianity itself, old enough to fit Marcus's description of something found in ruins that predated Babylon. There's a footnote in one of the confidential reports, written by a curator who handled the fragments during their initial examination. He noted that the wood was warm to the touch, even in cold storage, and that one of the fragments had markings that seemed to change depending on the angle of observation. "Like it's showing you what it wants you to see," he wrote. He also noted that after handling the fragments, he experienced a recurring dream for months, walking through a vast city of stone beneath a desert somewhere. And in the center of that city, a temple, and in the heart of that temple, something waiting patiently in the darkness, calling his name in a voice that sounded like his father, his wife, his children, all speaking at once. He requested transfer to a different department and refuses to discuss the fragments. When pressed by colleagues, he'll only say, "Some things stayed buried for a reason." The journal of Brother Marcus remains in a private collection. its existence known to only a handful of scholars. The Church has never officially acknowledged it, and mainstream academia treats it as a curiosity at best, a hoax at worst. But there's a reason certain historians won't discuss it after dark, won't talk about the details with their office doors open. Because once you've read Marcus's account in full, once you've seen the archaeological evidence that almost perfectly matches his 700-year-old descriptions, you start wondering about something that's almost too terrible to consider. You start wondering how many faces around you are exactly what they appear to be. How many smiles are genuine verses, how many have been practiced for centuries by something that's been studying humanity like we study insects. You start noticing the small delays, the practiced gestures, the eyes that don't quite blink at the right frequency. And late at night, when you're alone with your thoughts, you remember Marcus's warning. It learns from interaction. Every conversation is an opportunity for teaching. Every confession is an opening for connection. And if these things are patient enough to wait buried in boxes for thousands of years, what's 700 more years of practice at wearing human skin? The last Templar saw what wore the priest's face, and he died trying to warn us. The question that should keep us awake at night is simple. Did anyone listen? Or has it been wearing us all along?